Hello and welcome to the Nerdy Photographer Podcast. I am your host, Casey Fatchett. This is our first official Nerdlet episode. I tested out some short bonus episodes for the last couple of months and the reaction was pretty good. So I'm going to try these micro episodes for a couple of months to see what you think. These are going to focus on technical aspects of photography as opposed to our long form interview episodes. They'll be quick hitting, under 10 minutes without all the bells and whistles. And our first topic is going to be 10 tips and tactics for tack sharp photos. Try saying that 10 times fast. You can't. I've been trying to say it slowly and I've screwed it up about half a dozen times. Here's the thing. Photographers strive for sharp focus. It's such an important issue. Whenever a new lens comes out, photographers always ask, yeah, but how sharp is it? We struggle to get tack sharp photos. I certainly have. And there are a lot of things we can do that don't involve buying a new, sharper lens to get them. So, without further ado, here are the 10 tips and tactics for tack sharp photos. Number 1. Use a faster shutter speed. Yeah, we're going right back to the exposure triangle. You use a faster shutter speed. That should be your first step towards getting sharper images. The most common reason for soft photos is motion blur caused by your subject moving faster than your shutter. The rule of thumb for handheld shutter speed is that your shutter speed should be no slower than the focal length of your lens. For example, if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, your shutter speed should never be less than 1/60th or slower than that. So that way, like when you're holding handheld, when you're doing handheld, or like with a 200mm lens, your shutter speed should be 1/200th of a second or faster than that, and so on. Number 2, use a smaller aperture. Again, the basis of everything is start with the exposure triangle. Use a smaller aperture. It's all about the exposure triangle. When you're having trouble getting sharp images, try using that smaller aperture because while most lenses are just a little bit sharper throughout the entire frame at small apertures, f8 or higher, it could be that you're shooting at a low depth of field. Yes, you might need to bump up your aperture from f1.4 if you want sharper photos. Just saying. I mean, because you want to keep people in your focal plane. And the lower you go, like the wider open you get, the less depth of field you have. So try up using a smaller aperture first or second, and maybe that'll give you some help. Number 3, keep your lens clean. Also at the top of the list of tips for sharp photos, keep the glass clean. Dust and dirt on your lens element can not only cause artifacts in your images, but they can also disturb the focusing of your lens and fool your camera into thinking it's properly focused. While you're cleaning your lens, you should have also cleaned any filters that you're using. And speaking of filters, that brings us to number 4. Remove any unnecessary filters. If you have filters on your lens that you don't need and you're having issues with focusing, remove those filters. The more glass you have between you and your subject, the more likelihood that something might interfere with the focusing. Remember, this is just a little piece of silicon sensor that's trying to determine whether or not, things are in focus. Give it as much help as you can. And low quality filters are going to decrease the sharpness of your images. Number 5, use a tripod or some other form of stabilizer. If you're not shooting, you can't shoot it handheld because it's a longer exposure. Or even if it is a quick exposure, using a tripod or some sort of stabilizing element. You might be just leaning it against a tree or, a rock, or finding like one of those little platypod things, like just like a pillow to lay your lens on, or your something to stabilize your camera, other than just using your hands. Whether you're using a longer shutter, a longer exposure, is going to make sure that your camera doesn't shake, causing your photo to blur. Brings us to number 6, using a remote. When you're shooting a long exposure, especially, even the pressure of your finger touching the shutter release can be enough to move your camera and blur your photo. There are all kinds of remotes, from cable releases that attach directly to your camera, infrared remotes that are sort of like line of sight, and you can use that to trigger your camera, as well as devices that attach to your camera and allow you to control the camera settings from a smartphone or a tablet. There's a bunch of them out there. Just like searching for camera remotes and you'll find a bunch of things. But using a remote will help keep your camera steady, especially like things with you using like astrophotography or landscape photography. And you don't want to touch that camera because it might blur your image. Next, number 7, lens calibration. Now, this is like getting into really detailed things. Like each of your lenses can do what's called micro focus adjustment. And you have to go into your camera settings, and then you need to get they sell them. They're pretty cheap. They're like a little bullseye with a ruler next to it. It'll determine, like, when you focus your camera, it might be off by just like a half an inch in one direction or whatever. You enter those numbers for that particular lens. When you do a micro focus adjustment with your camera, you have to do it for your individual camera and for each individual lens. And it might sound like a pain. It's a little bit of work, but it will help you ensure that you're getting sharper pictures. All right, next, image stabilization. Whether it's in your camera or it's in your lens, if you've got it, use it. Number 9, focus manually. If you can switch to manual focus, if you don't have like very quick moving subjects that you absolutely need to use autofocus with, use it and make absolutely sure your picture is sharp. Do that pixel peeping, live view, zoom in and make sure things are sharp, and then take your picture. And number 10, finally, last resort, sharpening software. Use that sharpening software to save a soft image. There's a lot of different things out there. This from Topaz Labs, Lightroom and other things can be used to sharpen your photos. Just be realistic about when a photo might be too far gone to save. All right. I hope you enjoyed this first micro episode of the Nerdy Photographer podcast. Please subscribe and share with your friends. If you enjoyed this and you found it helpful, please share with your photographer friends. This is an independent podcast. That means there's no network behind this marketing these episodes or a team of producers who are editing all of this. It's just me. So if you enjoyed this, I would really appreciate it if you shared with your photographer friends. And that being said, stay safe and stay nerdy.
Stop!